We are recording. Hello, Drew. How are you?
Hello. I'm pretty good. How are you, Michael?
I am doing fantastic. I am very excited that you've taken the time to be on my show today. We're going to be talking about all things astrology. And, you know, I'm a big fan of astrology. See, I almost
And
said
Australia.
Australia, because you're from Australia. Oh my God. That may
That's
happen a
okay.
lot. That may happen a lot.
You get two things in one.
Two things in one. I love Australia. I love astrology. So that being said, I don't know much about it. You know, I know a
Okay.
little bit about it, but I don't
Yeah.
know a lot about it because I know it's so complex. I've had
Mm.
a chart done years ago, and
Okay.
when we talk about houses and planets and things like that, I got so confused. I just said, give me the
Mm.
basics, give me what's going on. So I know last year we had this big event with Saturn and Jupiter, and everybody has been talking about it. Even the regular media has been talking about it.
Right.
I
Yeah.
didn't really have an understanding what it all meant. Maybe can you just, tell us what that really meant to us and, what was all about?
Yeah. I mean, for someone who wants to start with the basics, that's a pretty big thing to start with.
Well, I mean, because I know that, I realize that, but it was just something that, everybody's been talking about this thing, right? And I have no answers. I was like,
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why people are talking about it is because we can see it. It's a visual thing that we can kind of look up in the sky. And I think we've been looking up into the sky since the dawn of time, and whether that was for agriculture to know when to plant things or whether it was for meaning. There's something about us looking up, even when we're just like asking a question like, oh, what is this? We do that, we look up. So I do think that that's, if you want to go on a basic sense, that's something that we can all kind of share in together, that this is something, a visual phenomenon, that we can see two planets in the sky joining together at one point. Astrologically, it's part of a bigger cycle. So there were two planets, Jupiter and Saturn. So Jupiter is a planet that represents growth and learning and expansion. And Saturn, like we know physically that Saturn is a sphere with rings around it. And those rings of Saturn are pretty much the opposite of Jupiter. Where Jupiter expands, Saturn contracts. So they have this dance that they do together about kind of growth and expansion and optimism that has to come in through a sense of order and restraint or control. So Jupiter and Saturn, like all of the planets, have a synodic relationship with each other where they connect, but Jupiter and Saturn come together every 20 years. So they come together in a conjunction, but every 200 years, they come together in a different element. So that's what's kind of unique about this one, is that for the last 200 years, Jupiter and Saturn have been coming together in Earth signs. So in 2020, it's like the initiation. It's like we're kind of walking into a new 200-year era of Jupiter and Saturn meeting in air signs. So there's when these things change, it's called a great mutation, when they change elements. There's often we go into it and then we come back out of it and then we go into it fully. So in 1980 and 81, Jupiter and Saturn met for the first time in Libra. But then in 2000, they met in Taurus. So Libra is an air sign and Taurus is an earth sign. So between 1980 and now, we've had this we're getting a taste of it. We're moving into this air element, and air rules things like technology and communication and learning. And earth is more about tangible things, practical things, building roads and buildings and cities. So we're leaving an era that kind of, we got a twinge of it or a little taste of it from 1980 to 2000. But in 2000 till now, there's been what I would say is like a very deep resistance from the earth core, if you like. Those people who are very reliant on wealth and are very reliant on capitalism and these systems and these structures that are based in this earth cycle. So when we kind of advance into this new cycle, yes, we get resistance, but we also, when Jupiter and Saturn meet, we get this sense of optimism and growth and kind of like an acceleration of potential, if you like. So yes, it's great that Saturn and Jupiter met. It's always great for society when we meet. It's like, oh, there's change, there's things that we can do. But moving into a new 200-year cycle is enormous. And so Jupiter and Saturn met in Aquarius. And we all know that there's this buzz about the age of Aquarius. So people are like, is this the age of Aquarius? And the answer is, yes and no. Not that this is the doorway into the age of Aquarius, but astrologers will argue when that begins. But there's a general consensus that it'll be around 2100 that it will happen. So in my eyes, it's like when we have these massive changes, it's not like you just kind of open the blinds one day on December 21st and, oh, look, it's Aquarius season. It's like we've been building up to this. There's been changes that are happening, and it's kind of like we've gone through this portal into this land where it's like, oh, I can kind of breathe out. It's like Aquarius energy can come in now. It's like there's some kind of initiation that's happened. So technically it's not the age of Aquarius, but I do think we're going to have these like portals that will open that will bring in more of that energy, so that when the age of Aquarius begins, it's like, well, of course we're here, and then it will kind of unfold.
Oh,
Very
I like
long-winded
that.
answer.
No, but it's a brilliant
big
answer.
cycle.
It's a brilliant answer, because if you look at how the events of the world are shaping right now, and there's that resistance, that change, and it makes all sense. Now you can see, this is what I love about astrology, but just in general, having people like you on, is that you can finally say, okay, all this bullshit that's going on in the world, like you can see what's going on. Like everything has to be, this, there's resistance to that power structure, all those different things. And you got to bring in that kind of lighter, that love, like you said, like an air sign, that love, that excitement and that positivity. Like I just got a little goosebumps thinking about that. And I really think that's important for, especially, going forward now into 2021. I think people are craving that. People are needing something like that,
right.
which I think is so, so important.
Yeah.
Is that what people are looking for when they come to you for for astrology readings?
I think so. I mean, in 2020, and when you just said the thing happened last year, I was like, what do you mean last year? It was last week, but I'm getting used to it being 2021.
I know, I'm the same way.
In 2020, I was busier than ever, and I know a lot of astrologers were. It was really interesting to watch which professions like decreased in business, if you like, or expanse, if you like, and astrologers really was like, oh, we need meaning, we need to understand this. And I do notice that with astrology, especially like in countries where it booms, it seems to me like the closer you are to crisis, the more you need meaning. So there's some countries in the world that are like, no, we're fine, and it's like astrology, yeah, it's fine, it's something over here. But when you talk to people whose lives are constantly impacted, it's like, yeah, we need meaning, we need understanding for what's going on. So last year, yes, 100% people wanted to know what is going on. But the thing with astrology, and when you have your birth chart read, is that you can locate it for yourself. So for some people, the energy that was coming through in 2020 might have impacted finances, and for other people it might have been about home and family. For others it was about health. For others it was about career. Like, some people had a lot of people close to them die, and other people didn't, so it's like, I think last year it was like, where is this happening for me? Like, we're all impacted by this. And I think that's a really interesting kind of correlation with the Aquarius energy, because Aquarius is represented by a water bearer. It's a person standing there with a jug pouring water out onto the masses. So Aquarius kind of has this energy of being generous to humanity, or wanting, I always think of Aquarius as like a rising tide that lifts all boats. Whatever I'm doing is going to help everybody. But the thing with the water bearer is that it's not pouring whatever it's pouring onto being like, oh, you can have it, and you can have, or you've been making a lot of money, you can have it. It's like everybody gets it. So we've seen that with this virus, nobody is spared. It doesn't matter your class status or your wealth or where you come from. It's everybody. That's the thing of the water bearer, is that everybody is impacted. So while people are looking for hope, and I think that's great, I think that's a very normal thing, especially in dire times.
Yes. Crazy times.
It's important to remember that it is both Jupiter, which is abundance, is growth, expansion, but it's also Saturn, and Saturn comes in with a stern hand. It wants to restrict, it wants to limit, it doesn't want too much growth, it wants to regulate things. So I do think
walk that, before you run.
Yes.
It's kind of like saying, okay, you got to wait, just give us a second, you're going to get there. Yeah. But you just can't get it right away, because it's just like, just slow down. Slow the F down, you know what I mean? Just like take a little bit, you know what I mean?
And Jupiter is there. Yeah, Jupiter's there like, no, let's go. Let's like, I've got all these ideas and these big projects and these things I want to do. But I do think that we're going to see, and this really ties into other things that happened in 2020, I do think we're going to see a lot stricter regulations coming in. So it's not just going to be like, oh, everybody's affected and there's going to be great things. It's like, okay, everybody's being impacted by this virus, and that means we have lockdowns. That means that we're going to change laws about travel. That means maybe there'll be different things about borders. You know, it's not just, oh, everything's great. I think we really need to be mindful of the unseen things. That's the thing with the element of air. We can't see air. We can see things that travel in air. We can see airplanes. We can see, you know, hot air balloons, or, you know, air itself we can't see. So there's a lot that's kind of going on in the invisible realms, if you like. And you could say that's like people's connection to spirit or wanting meaning, but also like if you think of just how technology has boomed, it's like we can't pick up the internet. I can pick up my computer, but I can't actually hold the internet. And so that means that there's lots of things happening invisibly, like people are trolling, there's surveillance, there's more security, people are watching you. Like, I think it's something for us all to be really mindful of about, yes, there's really great things, but also we need to be mindful of how much we're being limited or kind of reined in, if you like.
Yeah, you know, it's so true. Like, I mean, I've just watched some crazy videos just on TV about these police officers going crazy for, you know, having one extra body, or had like 6 people in a family house and they're trying to arrest these guys. And it was just it was just disconcerting. I was like, man, this is, I mean, but I understand that, because a lot of people are talking about that. There's like more control, more things, and we got to pay attention. You just can't walk around with your eyes closed anymore. You got to kind of open them up and kind of say, yeah, you know, shit's
it's
going
really
on.
Yeah, we're asking, you know, what is the truth? I think that's a huge thing. Like right now, the nodes are in Sagittarius and Gemini, and that's a deep access about truth and words and meaning. And what I'm asking is, who's checking the fact checkers? You know, you can't just believe, oh, this has been fact checked. Okay, cool. It's like, actually, it's all of our responsibility. And that's a real Saturn word. What is your responsibility in this new world? So yeah, it's like you can't just take it at face value to be like, oh yeah, this thing's happening. It's like, why is it happening, and who's doing it, and where did that come from? And it takes a lot more energy. It's more mental energy, which is air. That's an air thing. Whereas I think in the Earth cycle, there's like, Earth is very reliable. You know, it's like we need Earth, we need those kind of 4 pillars of support so that whatever grows above it will be steady. But yeah, but also if you think about just like buildings, how people are designing and building buildings now so that they're earthquake resistant, whereas before, if an earthquake happened, the building falls over. And so that's a great example of Earth. It's like gets very rigid and it gets very stuck in this way of being. It's like, no, we're not going to change it. But when something happens, when change happens, it doesn't actually stand up. So we have to kind of we're adapting to a new way. We're adapting to changing the design, and also saying like, okay, that might have worked before, but you know, now it doesn't. And I just had the vision of remember, I don't know if you remember, but when we were kids, when you went to the bank, you had a bank book.
Yep.
And they digitally printed out how much money you had. And now it's like a card, you know, and you check it on your phone, which you carry in your pocket. Like,
I so remember that. I still remember it.
Yeah, that's an Earth example of like something tangible that you're holding that says this is how much money you have. And now it's like, boop, 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 digitally.
Well, that's what they're even talking about, is getting rid of like hard currency. Like getting rid of hard
cryptocurrency is total air as well. Where is it?
Yeah, exactly. Where is it? Like, you know, do I have it? You know, I just watched so many movies. You know, I remember back in the 80s, they talked about all those things, and I can't remember which exactly movie it was, but again, it was like, you know, all of a sudden they just press a button and then your money goes.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, you know, this is kind of that trend now. It's like, you know, everything's, I mean, I go to the bank, but there's no hard currency. I mean, where's your money? So
totally.
It kind of freaks me out a bit.
It does. And I think also it's not about like, oh, we end this Earth cycle and therefore no more Earth things exist. It's about kind of they transform into an air expression, if you like. And when you were talking then, I was thinking that, or reminded that, I think it was Elon Musk, he created a chip you can put in your brain to keep up with the speed of technology, because we're not evolving fast enough to keep up with the speed that technology is going. So for me, I was like, no, I'm just going to stay here in the dark ages. but if we go 200 years from now, when we're transitioning to the next cycle, that just might be normal.
That is so bizarre. Like just to have like a neural link. And
Yeah.
I mean, the whole idea, just the idea with IA and control and robots, like I love to have my, this little meat suit. I like to keep it the way it
Yeah.
is. I love my little meat suit. I want to know that I'm the one. I want to make sure that the terrible thoughts are my thoughts, not somebody else's.
Right,
I
right.
really appreciate that. Man, that's so interesting. See, this is what I love about astrology. And it's something that doesn't get really talked about a lot. And, I think this is really important that, that the ideas of astrology is really important. So we, we touched on this briefly just before we went to air. And we talked about, what is see, again, I'm saying it again, astrology.
What
Oh
is
my God.
Australian astrology?
Oh my God. It's because I'm thinking it's like, man, I want to go to Australia right now because it's so cold here.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah,
who doesn't want to go to Australia? They
right.
got
I
like
know.
3 corona cases.
Is that it?
I'm exaggerating, but it's like,
Okay.
it's not many.
It's not
They
many.
really locked down, like New Zealand. They just kind of went into lockdown, and you
They
can
did
trace it now. You can at least know where it's come from and where it's gone.
That's crazy. So astrology, let me
Hmm.
get that. So what is it?
Yeah, so I guess in a basic level, it's the study of the correlation between celestial events and events happening on Earth, and that, in a sense, what as above, so below. So whatever is happening in the heavens is reflected, vice versa. That is also happening on Earth, and within that, within the astrology world, there's 2 camps. You could say that some people say that it's a symbolic representation, like there's no causal mechanism, and other people are saying that yes, it is causal, and there's either a known or an unknown force. So people are open to saying like something is happening there, we don't know what it is, and other people are saying, we're all rotating around the sun, there's electromagnetism, there are forces at play. So while people within the community don't necessarily always agree on how it works, they do agree that it works. So
Okay.
I think I'm kind of curious to see how that changes going forward from the Earth cycle into the air cycle, because Earth wants it to be structured. It wants it to be kind of, this is what this thing is and we can rely on it. And I think people have had a hard time with astrology for that reason, that it seems to say like, well, if you don't know what it is and you don't know how it's working, then that devalues it. And for me personally, I'm like, actually, that kind of makes me want to lean into, dare I say, the magic of it, or the how does this work? Like, where do we come from?
See,
Like,
that's a really big question.
oh yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one answer either. I don't think that, I mean, the length of this podcast, we couldn't get to anywhere near as close to deciphering or understanding what
It
that
had to be
is.
like a mini series.
Yep.
Yeah, just to decipher it all out. Like it would have to be on, just trying to figure it out, because I think that's interesting too, because I've always been fascinated by the cosmology of the soul and where we come from. And a lot of
Right.
my big influences is a lot of the teachings and readings through Edgar Cayce.
Mm-hmm.
That's who really inspired me to get that understanding and his perception of it. And then just with um, my own perceptions and what I've seen over the years and what I've talked to different people. And I think it's just so fascinating. Like, where do we come from? Do the planets actually influence us on this level? Are we these basically stardust people coming through this portal into this galaxy, and then we're actually spending time on planets? And I'm just like, when I heard that, it's like, what do you mean? We're actually spent time on Jupiter. We actually spent time on Venus.
Right.
And it's like, there's no civilization. There's no, we're always looking for that physical thing, but it's not like,
Right.
well,
Right.
this meat suit is very physical 3D, and that's what it's meant to be in this,
Yeah.
basically our animal planet. But in Jupiter and many places, we have consciousness. Like consciousness survives outside the body.
Right.
So it's an elevated, different level of dimension that we spend time on this. And then it's like, okay, well, if those planetary influences and we spend time there, it should be part of our soul that should influence, how we work and how we think and how we do all these different things. Am I really off base here, or is it
No,
kind of?
I mean, I'm really curious about how you see the world. That's kind of why I love astrology. I got to psychological mind that wants to understand things. So I'm like, oh wow, that's so interesting. And to me, when you're talking, I'm like, why would you limit yourself to the planets that revolve around our sun? Like, there's so many other planets, there's dimensions, there's potentially other universes. Like,
well, that's the truth. I mean, what I'm saying is just this particular, I mean, yes, there is, because I mean, there's different stargates. I mean, there's different galaxies, but I'm just saying this particular kind of,
for sure. I
think
mean,
most people understand that.
yeah, I personally, on a personal level, I love going down those roads. I love kind of just like being unbridled in my thoughts and possibility of the universe. But with astrology, for me, I kind of think of it like, I mean, I bring those bits in, but I think of it like riding a bike. It's like you don't get on a bike and believe in the bike. It's like, that if you push this pedal, then this one, and you keep a balance, that the chain will kind of align the pedals to the back wheel and that'll keep it moving. There's an understanding of the mechanics. And I think that especially in the last 200 years, there's been a real merging of psychology and esotericism. How do I say that?
Esoterical?
Yeah, just like a blending of that, where in some ways the mechanics of astrology has been put to the side in place of, bringing in past lives and all these other possibilities, which I'm not adverse to. But for me, the way I practice astrology is there's a system that works, and it's been, our ancestors have been looking at the sky and watching patterns and watching cycles and watching how that thing happening there makes this thing happen here on Earth. So for me, with my practice, I really like to stay in the mechanics, because once I start, for me, if I start going into those other realms, then maybe I'm projecting, because, when we start talking about past lives, nobody wants to be homeless. Nobody wants to be, all those other things that we've probably all been. Everyone's like, I was royalty, or, I came from money and now I don't have money. So personally, I trust the astrology. I think there's a system there that works. And the more I study it, the more I kind of read it, then to me, it doesn't matter if in my mind, oh, this is right, this is wrong. It seems to reflect with the person that I'm reading for, that like, hey, this is right. Does that make sense? Maybe I went off base.
No. I mean, it totally makes sense, because I mean, it's really important to figure out how you practice that, because, if somebody's listening to this, they want to kind of, take your services on. They want to kind of have a practical approach to it. And I really appreciate that, because I love the woo-woo. I love the out there, but I love the practical approaches. If you can't take that knowledge and that information, apply it to your life here on Earth, I mean, that's what it's really about. We're all looking for, ways to help each other out in our journey, in our soul's journey. And I think that's really important. So one of the questions I want to ask you, so the type of Australia, I'll say again, Jesus.
What type of Australia am I from?
Oh my God. I'm going to have to edit this whole podcast. No,
Don't
actually, no, I'm not going to, because that's just me being an idiot. That's what happens.
Oh no, it's pretty normal. I've done it myself a million times. Astrology Australia.
Yeah, exactly. So the type of astrology that you practice, is it hellenistic? Is that is that the correct way of saying it?
It is the correct way of saying it. And I do study Hellenistic astrology. I wouldn't say I am a hard and fast Hellenistic astrologer. I think I would need to do a lot more study over a lot more time. And I think that's a really crucial piece of astrology, is that it takes time. But I would say I'm a modern Hellenistic astrologer. I'm just like, I've been studying Hellenistic astrology for maybe the last 4 years. And so when I started studying Hellenistic astrology, my teacher was asking me, what's your background? And she was like, okay, well, a few things are going to kind of bump up against each other. So in myself, I was like, okay, I'm going to put what I've learned on the shelf. I'm not going to say that I discredit it or whatever, but to learn this, I needed to kind of put my all the things I kind of piled on top and say, like, I really wanted to get down to, where does astrology come from? What is its origins? And Hellenistic astrology it comes from a time where there was lots of, different pieces of astrology, and it came together as this system, a system that was taught and could be explained. And from there, it kind of branched off. So I lost my train of thought a little bit there, but yeah, I forget what I was talking about.
Well, we're talking about the the way that you were learning
Oh yeah.
hellenistic astrology.
Yeah, so I'll try. So, oh, that's right. I remember now. So the way I was kind of seeing it was at the kind of like a garden, if you like, and the base level is where all of the astrology techniques exist. And this is like everything is connected. They understand each other. And over time, astrology has gone through kind of peaks or booms, and also times where it had to go underground. And so there are some lineages of astrology, like Indian astrology. It has an unbroken chain. They can pretty much like trace it right back. Whereas Western astrology, it's like, okay, it went underground at this time and we lost all these manuscripts. We lost all these kind of understanding of techniques. So it gets to the point where now in 2020, it's like we have this one shoot here and we have this shoot here and this one here that comes from this origin. But there's so much missing. So I was like, why is this like this? Because a lot of people are taught astrology as like, just take it, this is how it is. But I wasn't kind of satisfied with that. I wanted to know what was at the bottom of the garden, where did this come from? And a really interesting kind of piece to that narrative is that I think it was in the 80s, I want to say the 80s or late 70s, it was kind of popular for scholars to translate texts. A lot of texts were coming out of monasteries and libraries, and people just like translated so many texts. And a lot of those texts were astrological texts, but they weren't astrologers. So in the 80s, the astrologers got hold of these texts and were like, okay, well now it's been translated, but what does it mean? What are the techniques? So I wanted to study with someone who was working with those texts and who also translate texts, to be like, she's even still discovering these techniques and new things. But there's something that came out in the 80s, and obviously this air cycle, that said like, we now have more access to the reason why this technique is like this and this one is like this, and actually we've been doing this one wrong, so we can go back and rectify it. So I guess I just have a deep need to know where we come from or why we do the things we do. I'm never quite satisfied with like, just take this and believe it. I wanted to unpack that. So yes, I study Hellenistic astrology and I incorporate it in my practice, but there's an element of psychological astrology or Western modern astrology too.
All right. So that being said, where do you think we come from?
Who's we?
Our souls, us.
Right.
Humans on this planet.
When you say soul, when you say soul, what do you mean?
So I guess the piece of which that came from the divinity, the spark.
Right. Yes.
Consciousness.
That's a very good question, which I'll just say straight out. I don't know where we came from, but I do kind of live my life and my understanding of the world, or I live by a notion that everything is connected. There's nothing separate. There's nothing, astrologically, the moon represents emotions and feelings of where we come from, like our base kind of needs, but it also rules the tides. It kind of has this pull on the earth as well. I don't know where we come from. I don't know where we go. Do you? I'd love to hear about it.
I mean, from my understanding is that source is basically kind of the all be of all. Mm-hmm. And when source decided to again expand, mm-hmm. it broke off into pieces, and hence the Big Bang, and we mm-hmm. fragmented into souls, little pieces of source, little fragments spread out among the universes, and then we're just in this big long journey. And then eventually, from my understanding, is that the idea, the end game, is to learn enough that we'd be able to go back to source and rejoin with source and become whole again.
Interesting. Yeah. See, I would say, first of all, when anyone says the Big Bang, I'm always like, well, maybe it wasn't the first one. Maybe it's not the only one. Who knows if it just like expands and contracts, and when you say maybe we'll go back to source and be one again, it reminds me of when people say, oh, it was meant to be. It's a really common expression. Oh, it was meant to be. This, everything just kind of lined up. And when I hear that, I often think like, okay, well then just try right now to not be where you're meant to be. Like, it's actually impossible. So that's my understanding of being like, we're not separate. There's no way that I'm separate from source. I am source. You are source. This conversation is source, and everything in between and outside of it. So I think that in some ways it kind of reminds me of that earth element that we're leaving, is like, there's a control here. We can understand it by putting it in this box and understanding it like this, and this air kind of blows that up and says like, wow, well, maybe, yeah, there's so much more that we were limited by, that we couldn't see in that earth thing, because we wanted that safety and security, and we needed it maybe.
I think so too. I think that's totally true. Like, the whole idea you were talking earlier about, technology moving faster than what we are. And again,
Right.
it's that, I mean, there's just so much information. I mean, part of this podcast was basically to get me to learn, to
Okay,
expand.
wow, I love
It's
that.
really, I mean, the idea is that I love people like yourself coming on here and getting educated on that and getting a different point of view, so that it expands my consciousness a bit and kind of go, yeah, that makes sense. That part I don't like, but that part, yeah, that really, oh wow, that's, yeah, that kind of just like, oh man, got the mouse running in the back of the brain now. Now I'm like,
totally.
yeah,
and it's also, I heard something you said earlier, which kind of reminded me of myself, where you're like, oh, I love this earth meat suit, or I love, things being like this. I don't want it to go too fast. And I do think that boomers and Gen X are going to have a harder time kind of transitioning. I think millennials and generations beyond that have been born into an earth cycle. So they're already there. Like, I don't know if you notice this, but I think kids in the 80s, born in the 80s, there's some consciousness, there's some elevation of understanding or awareness, and the way they can use computers and technology. It's like they're wired differently. So I'm really conscious in myself of when I say things like, oh, I don't want a chip in my brain. It's like, well, why not? Like, if that's where we're going, I understand the resistance.
yeah.
But if it's also where we're going, then what is it in me that is resistant to that? Or maybe I'm supposed to be the resistance. But I do think it's interesting to watch, like, what makes us feel safe, or what is it that you want to keep one foot in this earth cycle, when we're actually moving, and we are going very much into an air cycle where things are changing. So
do you think it's fear? Do you think?
I think there's an element of fear for sure. And I think also, like, for example, language is changing a lot. There's like younger generations are like talking about pronouns. It's like, it's there. It's like, well, of course, when, gender, duh. Like, and the earth cycles are like, well, hang on a second. I've just had 40 years of saying she, her, he, him, and yeah, myself included. And I use they, them pronouns. And I'm like, I get it. But it's this, I do think that boomers and Gen X have had more time in this earth cycle. So it doesn't mean that you can't undo it. It's just about, I think there's a more conscious effort that it will take. And I think there's a piece of responsibility in this, and that is our responsibility to listen and to learn and to be open to those things, and to question, is this fear, or is it actually quite sensible to not put a chip in your brain?
Yeah, like that again, that's fundamentally, that's the same thing. It's like,
right?
Yeah, like, I mean,
it's probably both.
Yeah, but again,
yeah, sorry.
Time will tell, right? That's the great thing about it.
And that's a Saturn word. Time will tell.
Is it?
Saturn rules time. For the longest time, Saturn was the furthest most outer planet that we had. So, and those rings around it, and it was a boundary line of our known world. So it was, it rules things like rules and regulations and limits and time and like endings. So Saturn rules elders and aging, and Saturn is a very kind of matter-of-fact energy. It's that kind of mortal reality that, oh yeah, birth is great, but it 100% ends in death. It's like this kind of reality check of like, life is great, but do you fear death? What is the ending? What do you want to look back on your deathbed and be like, oh yeah, I'm kind of happy with what I did, or
Yeah.
So anything beyond Saturn was in the realm of kind of chaos and the unknown. So when we discovered the more outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they represented more things like chaos and mysticism, and the psyche and things that we inherit generationally.
Okay. So that being said about Pluto, is Pluto still classified as a planet?
Technically, by astronomy, it is a dwarf planet, and astrologically, as an astrologer myself, I still use Pluto. I think that once you start observing it and you live through a Pluto transit, you realize that there's nothing dwarf about it. It's actually enormous in its effect and its impact. And the way astrology works is the further out a planet is, the slower it moves, and therefore the longer time it takes to move through kind of a part of your chart. So it tends to have a bigger, kind of more, a deeper impact. So yeah, astronomy doesn't classify it as a planet, but I don't know many astrologers who are like, oh, okay, let's take Pluto out. It's like, no, it's actually huge.
Yeah, because I've always wondered about that, because, for
Yeah.
years they were going back and forth,
Mhm.
is it a planet? Is it not a planet? Is it an asteroid? Is it this? Is it that? And stuff like this. So that being said too, as well. So I've heard like comets and things like that affect us too, as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if you start talking about Pluto, then you want to talk about asteroids and centaurs. And I think if you're saying that, Jupiter impacts us, but an asteroid doesn't, then where do you draw that line? If something is rotating around the Earth and it has this effect, then how come one but not the other? So personally, I definitely think there's an impact, but I think that this is where Saturn comes in. It's like you need a sense of limitation. There's something like, I might be making this number up, but I want to say 40,000 asteroids. There's no way you're going to talk about 40,000 asteroids in a reading. So you want to be mindful about what you're talking about, what you're bringing in, but what's also personal for that person. Like what is impacting their chart, because not all 40,000 comets or asteroids are going to be doing something. Okay. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does, because I know I've did my chart a long time ago, and I just remember there was like a comet or something that came in. It was Chiron.
Chiron. Yeah, Chiron's an asteroid. Yeah, Chiron is really interesting. Yeah.
That was in my chart. I just remember that, and I just remember when she was telling me this, and I was like, oh.
That's an interesting thing to remember. What do you remember about it?
All I remember, it was the wounded healer.
And what does that say to you?
Well, that's just basically my life.
Chiron is really interesting, I think. Yeah.
Okay, can you give me a little bit more detail about that then? Yeah, kind of give me.
Sure. So Chiron exists, it kind of crosses the boundaries of Saturn. It exists between Saturn and Uranus, the next planet out from Saturn, but it crosses the boundaries. So of both planets, it has an elliptical orbit. So it's like kind of going in an egg shape, if you like, where the planets are almost going in a circle shape. So this in itself, like I always like to think of the physicality of the planets, like Saturn having rings around it and being the boundary line of the known world. Chiron crossing these boundaries of Saturn, or the orbit of Saturn and Uranus, is huge. So Saturn, the boundary line of our known world, keeping order, keeping time, making sure we have 24 hours, 7 days a week, and that spring follows winter. That's Saturn, this sense of order, and we rely on that. There's a sense of security that we get in that. When you go out beyond Saturn into the realm of Uranus, Uranus is about chaos. It's about revolution. It's about kind of sudden change. And what in a sense, what Uranus's job, if you like, is to free us from the way that we've become rigid or bound by Saturn. Saturn also rules fear. So it's like, okay, this thing keeps me safe, but okay, it's been keeping me safe so long. Is it still safety, or am I now just fearful of doing something new? So Uranus's energy is like, let's kind of blow that up, and it feels very destabilizing. So you can kind of think of it like this earth air energy that we've been talking about. It's not technically that, but as a metaphor, it's doing a similar thing. So Chiron crossing these boundaries is kind of bringing new energy into the old system, and it's really challenging us to look at wounds or pains or inhibitions that Chiron tends to represent something that we're really good at doing for other people. Like it's a gift that we have that we're very good at offering other people, but we're terrible at offering that to ourselves. And probably because it's a fear or a wound, or that thing of like, you can project it out to somebody else and therefore you don't really have to look at it yourself. So Chiron's mythology is that he was a centaur, so he's half human, half horse. So centaurs are like got their head in the clouds but their feet on the ground. There's this sense of mysticism, but also manifesting that, physically kind of grounding that energy. And in that sense of duality, Chiron was also half mortal and half immortal. So he was a great teacher, and it's kind of like people came from all the lands to learn from him, and he taught a whole range of things like medicine and magic and mathematics and permaculture, all those kind of everything that reminds us that there's unity, there's oneness. But he got shot in the ankle or the knee, this different stories, with a poison arrow, and because he was half immortal, he couldn't die. So he lived for a really long time as this great healer. I think he lived for like 900 years or something. And he was this great healer who couldn't heal himself. So he had this wound, but he couldn't die from it. And I guess one of the kind of narratives of Chiron is that he had to have this really deep healing process with himself to kind of, can we say, sit in his own shit? Are we allowed to say that here?
Oh, yeah.
He had to.
If you want to drop a few F-bombs, go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm Australian. We're born swearing. So
yeah.
He had to really sit in his own shit. He had to really kind of address his own wounding, his own pains, his own inhibitions. And in doing that, he kind of came out with a whole new syllabus, or a whole new kind of way of teaching that was based on him understanding his own pain and wounds, that he could then offer healing to other people in a different way. So Chiron has an orbit of, because it's elliptical, it's not the same for everybody going through life, but for everybody at around 50 or 51, Chiron does come back to the place it was at when you were born. So you might have heard of the Saturn return. That's like Saturn returns to the place it was at when you were born. Chiron, all the planets do that, but Chiron takes 50 years to do that. So there's often a really profound healing process that happens for people at around 50 that is connected to all these other things down the line. But there's something about that healing journey that is less about, how do I fix this? How do I like orchestrate my life so I don't have to really look at this, and saying like, how do I work with this? I can't get rid of this. How do I integrate this so that I can also offer healing, and whether it's teaching in a formal or informal sense, to other people, because I've had this whole chironic journey myself. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that just said that you just spoke about my life.
Do you want to share about your Chiron, or what that?
Well,
kind of
I mean,
brings up
as much as I can. I mean, it's really interesting because, yeah, I've had a lot of deep wounds. And, it's interesting. I spent the last okay, I am 50 now. I'm going to be 51.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Yeah. That's wild.
Because when you said that, it's like, oh, shit, he's coming back crying. He's coming back into my, it is like, it's like, wait a minute, I just did all this goddamn work. Like, shit. But the healing journey, I think I really started, when was it? When I really got into it. I always dipped my toe back and forth. I was so resistant. I just didn't give. I just like, I don't want to face it. I just kept showing up in my life, kept showing up. I got to deal with this, got to deal with it. And I didn't want to. The pain was just too awful. I think it was, trying to think, maybe 40.
I was going to say early 40s.
Yeah, it was about 40. Yeah, 40 when I finally, it's like, okay, I had enough. I really got to do this, full in, get into it and really kind of just keep forward at it, just keep working on it wherever it goes, and just, do all different, I did a variety of different modalities. Like, psychotherapy was one of the ones that were kind of the main things, just kind of get my head straight, kind of give me a different perspective on that. And then, and then it's like, as I found out, it's like, man, I kind of loved it, but I kind of didn't like it because I was so fascinated at the experience and what I was learning. But then I didn't like going into the muck. Like, here's the muck. You're gonna go into it. It's gonna feel like shit. Yeah. But you kind of feel better afterwards. It's like, okay, give me some more. Give me a little bit more. Let's peel another layer off. Let's just see what's available. And that's what it was, and it's like, it's still been part of that journey now. I mean, it hasn't been as much, but yes. Yeah. Like, and I'm more open to talk about it. Like I can talk about it. For sure. And, I kind of do that on my podcast too, there's always times where, I had this one lady on here. She actually channeled my inner child. Wasn't ready for it. It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful, but it kind of like threw me off. It's like, wait a minute. How'd you know what happened to me when I was a 5-year-old? It's like, wait a minute. Well, am I ready for this? And I was like, and she was like, you sure you want to do it? And I was like, no, I don't want it. Not on here. No, I'm not going to do this. And then she's like, all right, shit, I'll do
it. That's Chiron for sure. That's amazing. It's interesting that you say, I thought you were going to say something about the early 40s, because there's a thing that happens in the early 40s that, society calls a midlife crisis. And astrologically, it's a time when Uranus comes to a point of opposing the point it was at when you were born. So Chiron return is when Chiron comes back to that point. And there's also points in that cycle where it opposes, and an opposition is like a confrontation. It's like, whoa, I really have to look in the mirror. And if you think about all those things that we just spoke about Uranus being an awakener, it shakes you into kind of acknowledging what is keeping you bound and where you aren't free, and also in a sense what we've repressed. It's like there is no getting through the Uranus opposition or the midlife crisis without busting that box open. So this is why people leave marriages and they buy Lamborghinis and they date people that are 40 years younger than them, or 20, that would be weird. 20. So there's something that happens in the early 40s that is connected to the Chiron opposition and the Chiron return, sorry. So it's like you have to go through that portal, and the way I think about it, or the way I'm seeing it, is that it's like at the Chiron opposition.
I've been around somebody who has this really big, beautiful energy. It's intense. And it's just out there. And I'm thinking, man, we're just so jacked up. We're messing with electronics. I can't speak. I'm out of my body. I don't think I'm even grounded. You know what I mean?
Oh, do you want to ground yourself?
Well, the thing is, I am kind of grounded, but I usually do my podcast in bare feet, but I had socks on. Maybe that's what it was.
Okay. Have you taken your socks off? I'm in bare feet. I've got a little ball under my foot. I always need that to kind of like just stay here.
Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, do it.
All right, there we go. Done. There you grounded.
Should we keep talking about Uranus?
Yes. Let's, again, we're talking about the planet. All right.
Okay.
So for those listening, yes.
So maybe, I don't know where we got to, but I'll say, I think I remember.
About the cycles, we're talking about, people, losing their minds when they get into their 40s and midlife crisis. Yeah. Yeah.
So the Uranus opposition is, the thing with astrology also is every astrologer has a different astrology. So another astrologer might explain this differently, but it's the same transit, it's the same energy. But the way I see the Uranus opposition is that we're crossing a bridge. It's a time in life where we're crossing a bridge from one phase of life to the next. So at the Uranus opposition, you don't get to cross into the phase of becoming an elder, and that's where Chiron becomes the mentor. It's that you first have to address your childhood. You have to address the things you did and didn't do. You have to address, like, have I been kind of doing this job that has been really unfulfilling, or am I like really not dealing with my own pain? Am I like repressing something? So it's not just like, we're walking over the bridge and this is fun. It's like actually a huge awakening that happens about the reality of life, about what your reality and what you have and haven't been acknowledging. But also, I kind of see it like, this is the only way I know how to describe it. I kind of see this like a mesh, and it's probably less like everything being connected. And as you're crossing that bridge, you have to acknowledge where there's a bump, where there's pain, where there's trauma. And while we can't go back and, cut out that piece of time and experience that like that never happened, we can change our relationship to it. And I think that's a huge component of the Uranus opposition, is that we need to make peace with our inner child, or our, when we're kids, we don't have agency. And when we're a teenager, got all this energy, but we don't realize how protected we actually are. And when you get to standing on that bridge, you're like, who's actually looking out for me? It's actually my responsibility to be standing here and to not hold these grudges and not hold this resentment or bring this trauma with me, to kind of transform that into something so that I can cross this bridge. And Chiron is standing 10 years away waiting for me. So the things that come out in the early 40s are hugely connected to what happens in your 50s. It's like you have to go through this portal, if you like that word, or this huge transformation that leads us to another level of our own healing, but then also leads us into mentorship, because Chiron was a teacher. He mentored, all the greats, in mythology.
Wow. That's so beautifully said. And you know what? We're almost out of time.
Okay, I thought that was going to happen. That's great.
This went by so fast. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Except for that we lost the audio there, and I kept saying Astrology.
That's a thing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Marianne spoke so highly of you, and it was just like, I was looking for somebody to talk about this subject, and I was like, And I actually struggled for a while to find somebody who was qualified and had your wealth of knowledge. And it's like, Marion goes, I got the person. Don't you worry.
Oh, that's really
It-
sweet.
yeah. And I'm very, very excited. If people are looking to get your services, Drew, where can they find you?
I have a website, drewish.com, and I'm on Instagram. I think it's drew.ish. I like to write things about what's going on in the world. And my partner and I also do a project that we call Astro Tattoo Sessions, where I read the person's chart, and she's an intuitive artist, and she listens to the reading, and then she gets a lot of images, and then she ends up tattooing a symbolic image into people's bodies.
That is very, very cool.
Yeah, it's pretty magical. But since the pandemic, we haven't been able to do that. But we're doing it online, where we'll do a reading and she'll listen and do a big art piece. So there's lots of different things that we offer and that I offer. But yeah, drewish.com. Check it out.
Awesome. Well,
thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I so appreciate it too. It's been fantastic. I've learned a lot. It totally inspired
me.
And yeah, I'm excited to see what happens for this year and everything else.
Yeah.
So that being said, any predictions for 2021? Anything you can leave us? Any little golden nugget?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I have a prediction, but I would say that, we've stepped out of a massive year, 2020. We only talked about the end of 2020. There was a huge thing that happened at the beginning of 2020, which is tied into things in 2014 and, around then. 2021 is going to bring that energy and say, it's really going to challenge us in the places where we're still stuck in that earth cycle. And there's going to be a huge resistance between the new and the old. So I do think there'll probably be mass protests, or there'll be mass resistance. And I think, being your own fact checker, checking yourself and your own fears and your own kind of limitations is like, what is your personal responsibility in this? And I think also stepping into that air age is really trusting what we can't see. It's like, we can't see air, but we know that, we breathe oxygen, it keeps us alive. So part of our responsibility is like acknowledging what the fears are and saying, like, how do I do this in a new model, or kind of reshape this? So there definitely will be a lot of tension this year, and it's going to break a few molds. So not to kind of be like, oh, it's like more just, I would say, be open to the possibility of the new, and if there's resistance, then why? That's probably how I would shape 2021.
That's good. It gives some people to keep their eyes open, and some great advice. Again, thank you so very much. I really appreciate your time. You're such a beautiful energy. I just, so those who are listening and watching this, please check out the website, get a reading done. I mean, it could probably, really help you out in this particular time. So that being said, I'm just going to close off. So thank you so much. You've been listening and watching the Metaphysical Mentor podcast with Michael Philpott. Thank you so much for joining me, and goodbye for now.
Thanks, Michael.